Alexi Yashin, Chris Phillips, Bonkett Smollett, Mike Fisher, Marion Hossa, Martin Havlat, Pizza Line, Ray Emery, Brian Murray, Redden, Lee Cowan, Smith, Neal, Fat by Guide Walrus, Chara, Heatley, Alfie all left the team, Andrew Hammond, Kyle Tursa, Benajat, Double D on Mark Stone, Carlson, Matt Duchesne to Single, Hogberg, Shabata, Chuck, Unparalleled Success. We didn't start the rebuild. It was always brewing since 2009. We didn't start the rebuild. No, we didn't start it, but this time we've got it. Joining me now is Ottawa Senators fan and close personal friend of the show, Nathan MacCallum. How's it going today, Nathan?
I'm doing great, Ryan. Thanks for having me again.
It's a pleasure. You are, if I'm not mistaken, the first two-time appearing guest on the Unparalleled Success Podcast, so I couldn't choose a better guest to have on for the second occasion for the first time than you.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
It feels like forever ago that the Ottawa Senators lost 3-2 to the Los Angeles Kings on March 11th last year. Oh, it's been a long time, but Pierre Dorion made it feel like as short as an off-season as possible, making moves as frequently as it seemed he possibly could. What were your impressions on Pierre Dorion's off-season moves, and how do you feel this roster entering this season is different from the one we saw against the Kings 10 months ago?
Well, Ryan, for the most part, I think that he made a lot of moves that I liked. I really liked the signing of Dadonov. I've even come around on Derek Stepan. I think the second was a little steep to give up, but I like the player. Even a guy like Goodbranson, I'm interested to see how he's gonna play with Shabbat. But I think the biggest, with all those players in mind, I think the biggest difference between last year's roster and this year's is going to be in kind of the veterans around the team, which is kind of weird to say with a younger roster. But at the end of last year, they kind of got rid of a lot of the players that were around for that 2017 Eastern Conference Final run, the remainders in Anderson, Ryan, Boro, and then moving Pajot at the deadline. So I think a lot of the turnover is going to be in the veterans that are on the team. I'm not sure how I feel about that, to be honest.
I'm going to bring up the lines that I had you project for me. And of course, this is more of a rough draft more than anything because, of course, like 80 players in the entire league were placed on waivers today. So, and especially with the Sens and how much DJ Smith and Pierre Dorion have been talking about competition in camp and the players who are going to play will have earned their spots. So tonight there's a scrimmage, and we don't know who's going to be in the opening night lineup. This is a pretty accurate projection that you came up with, I think. Are there any surprises of players that didn't make the team that you thought might have, or what you had expected to be the final lineup for opening night going into camp?
Well, for me, I kind of just tried to pick out the guys that I thought fit into these spots best. That being said, I think a guy like Josh Norris probably cracks this lineup at some point, if not already. I know when the scrimmage is happening tonight, he's playing with Tkachuk and Dadonov, so that's definitely a good sign. When I was coming up with these lines, I just put Colin White up there because I think he'll get a shot. Again, I know he's played with Tkachuk and Dadonov already in training camp, but I think he's a player that they've I think Smith said at least once or twice that he's liked his camp, so I wouldn't be surprised to see him get a shot. And I think a guy like Batherson on this lineup probably moves up a bit, and I'm sure we'll see Logan Brown at some point. So there's plenty of places where like you said, it's a bit of a rough draft. There's a lot of places where that lineup could change.
One of the combinations that I've always liked that is intact for the scrimmage tonight is to Tkachuk with Josh Norris just because I love the name, the Chuck Norris line.
Chuck Norris, yeah.
But there's a few
Yeah.
combos on here, like this is such an improvement compared to last year's, and I love the Tkachuk Dadonov combination. Like those are two legit top wingers, and then Stützle and Stepan, like they've developed sort of a bromance going on in the early stages of camp since they've both arrived in Ottawa. So I like our top six, and even our bottom six doesn't look too bad. So I'm excited to get things going. And one of the most exciting storylines heading into this season is how Sen's third overall pick, Tim Stützle, torched the World Juniors, 10 points in 5 games, named the best forward in the tournament. What do you think about Tim Stützle this year? How excited are you to see him in the Sens uniform, and what are your expectations for what he can accomplish this year?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm really excited to just watch him play. I think I tweeted the other day something along the lines of getting really hyped from just the 2-second clips of him walking around the arena, just stepping onto the ice for the first time. And I think a part of that is definitely from, like you said, watching him in the World Juniors. And I feel like that gave a good idea on that he really is a really good player. I think it's reasonable to expect him to have an impact in the top 6 and to step in that role. But I have a bit of a hard time coming up with a point projection, given that it's a shortened season and the Sens are going to be playing against the same 6 teams over and over again. But I'd say probably somewhere around like a half a point a game pace I wouldn't be disappointed with. So somewhere in like the 25 to 30 point area. But honestly, I feel like I'm taking the under a bit on that projection. So I mean, I wouldn't be too upset if that's where he ends up, but I think he'll finish with more than that, if I'm being honest.
I agree. I think that it wouldn't be unreasonable to see him in like the 30 to 35 point range, and if you projected that over a full season, it could be around the 50 point mark, and it can only go up from there. The future's so bright for Stützle that I love that. I love that you mentioned your tweet about like the 2-second clips. I saw one person comment on there that as soon as he saw Stützle in the Sens uniform, he went from 6 to midnight. And if you know what that means, you know. If you don't, I'll leave it to you to figure up. I wouldn't recommend that the kids look it up. Maybe ask your parents about that one. But it's pretty awesome to see the excitement about Stützle and entering the season for all the Sens fans. Another compelling storyline heading into this season is the letter C right there. Of course, Brady Tkachuk and Thomas Chabot are, of course, the two favorites for a leadership role heading into the future. Of course, Chabot has the long-term contract that Tkachuk doesn't. But if you had to pick a future captain for the Sens, is there either of those two players that you would be leaning towards or an outside candidate?
My choice of captain between the two would be Brady, to be honest with you. That's my personal opinion, and also just trying to kind of get into the mind a bit of what management might be thinking. I think they've tended to go in the past more often with the more exciting player that sells more tickets. My logic for that would be looking at Carlson versus Chris Phillips from quite a few years ago, but and I think that Chabot just doesn't kind of have the wow factor that puts butts in seats, even though he's a really skilled player and I enjoy watching him. That being said, I mean, I'm not in the locker room. I'm sure there's guys on the team that could have a really different opinion on that. So
I wish we could have like a big heated debate on the show, but I'm also very strongly in the Tkachuk camp, so yeah. I think the argument for Chabot is that he's more of a tame like player, more responsible, more disciplined, and that he's going to be on the ice for 30 minutes a night, and that he can lead the way with his ice time and his play defensively, whereas the argument against Tkachuk is that he's going to be in the penalty box more often than you might want
Right.
for your captain. But for me, it just comes down to the fact that Brady Tkachuk is the kind of player that you would look up to for a demonstration on a player that puts his heart on his sleeve and plays as hard as he can every shift to win a game. And that's exactly what you look for in a captain. I don't care if he has 100 penalty minutes a season, because he's just so determined and he's a leader, and he hasn't even began to scratch the surface of what he can accomplish as like a 45-point player. Like when you look at his brother in Calgary, he's a point per game player. So I think that that's what Brady Tkachuk can come, and leading the league in like being the first player to have 300 shots and hits almost in the same season. I think it's a no-brainer to go with Tkachuk as long as you can sign him to the extension.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a good point. That's another wrinkle, but I assume they'll get that done at some point in the year.
DJ Smith is entering his second season of head coach in Ottawa. Besides his rigorous gum chewing, was there anything that stood out to you about his coaching style last year, and are you confident that the Sens can reach the unparalleled success under his tutelage?
Well, in terms of his coaching, I honestly I wasn't too sure on where to go with this when I saw the question. But I did enjoy that a lot of the players seemed to speak really highly of him. When you think about it, we're not really that far removed from the whole Uber incident, so it's kind of a nice change of pace to see the players that talk up the coach and say how much they like playing for him. And it's been said plenty of times before, but they were a hard team to play against last year, which was nice to see. And I really liked the energy and compete level that they had, uh, even in games where it seemed like they were a bit outclassed. Uh, I mean, all that being said, I'd consider myself somewhat in the middle in terms of confidence on DJ's ability to take the team on a deep playoff run into the unparalleled success. Uh, that's mostly due to the fact that he seems to have a lot of faith in some players that, frankly, aren't very good. A guy like Nikita Zaitsev, who keeps getting into the lineup in top four situations, and kind of talking up some other players who might not be too great of acquisitions for the team. I look at a guy like Austin Watson, where I wasn't too thrilled with the Sens uh, going out of the way and getting him, but he seems to be a player that Smith really likes. So I think time will tell on that.
And that sort of leads us into our next question, which we not only talked a little bit about there, but also earlier when we were going over the lines. Considering the amount of veterans that the Sens brought in, and we can go over the list again just because it's exciting. There's Dadonov,
Yeah.
Stepan, Watson, Paquette, Goodbranson, Coburn, and Murray. So with DJ Smith preaching that the players that are going to play in the lineup will have earned their spot in the lineup, does that make you worry at all about the young players not having an opportunity to prove themselves in such a crucial year with the expansion draft? Do you think that the team should give the young players who have maybe already earned an opportunity, such as Logan Brown, who had 8 points in 21 games last year, Josh Norris, who looked outstanding in the 3 games that he played, as well as I forget the other player I had on my list, but Drake
I think
Batherson,
like
because he
Addison, yeah.
was so improved when he came back up from Belleville last year. So do you think that that's a concern of yours, considering the expansion draft, and we have to come up with a list of players to protect, and we might not know what these players are, who they are, and what roles they will be in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I like that you bring up the point of the expansion draft. Um, but I really think that guys like Norris, Batherson, and Brown, once they get a chance, I think they're going to force their way into the lineup uh, and make guys like Anisimov or Watson into that Mikhail Bodker type of taxi squad, healthy scratch role. Um, I expect that at the start of the season, I know I've mentioned this already, but I expect that we're going to see a lot of the vets in the lineup to start the year. But I really think that with COVID and everything, the young kids are going to get a chance at some point this year, and I think they'll be able to grab it pretty easily.
One of the juiciest rumors going around the NHL right now is the availability of Columbus Blue Jackets star Pierre-Luc Dubois. Given the extension trade history between the Sens and the Blue Jackets, of course, there was the Duchesne trade. the Zingle trade with Duclair involved, and it dates back in history as well. There's been several other more minor trades, but of course the Duchesne one comes to mind. Do you think that the Sens might make a pitch for Dubois? What would you offer? What would you consider too much, and do you think it gets done?
Um, well, I think, like you said, I'm sure they've at least made a call about the availability of Dubois, and I expect they'll make some sort of offer. But I think, like a lot of people have already said, 22-year-old elite centers don't come on the market very often, so it's a bit harder to gauge what it gets it done. And also, I would assume there's going to be lots of teams that are looking to acquire him. We're also in the same conference. There's a lot of hoops to jump through, but I would think that there's something along the lines of maybe a player like Logan Brown, Brandstrom, and then you'd have to throw in a combination of roster players and picks. I think at that point to get it done, but it's really tough to say because he's so young and he's pretty good. It's really hard to come up with a package that would get the player out of Columbus.
I agree, because I see some mock trades from the Sens fan base, and most of them are based around, like, maybe you get a guy like Eric Brandstrom in there, and then throw in a forward like Drake Batherson, and then on top of that you're going to add a first-round pick and maybe a third-round pick for good measure. And a lot of people say that might not even be enough to get it done. And when you consider how good Drake Batherson is expected to be and how good Eric Brandstrom is expected to be, is it really worth acquiring Dubois, who, although an elite center, like, is he that much better than Brandstrom and Batherson that we're going to throw in a first and another draft pick? So I agree with you that I would rather not pursue that if that's the price.
Yeah, and to add to that, it's even worth noting that the Jackets aren't in a rebuild by any sense. I don't know how badly they want prospects in exchange for a developed player.
Exactly. So finally, if we take a quick look at last year's standings, I'm sorry we got to do this. Of course, we know where Ottawa finished. It's no secret. And when you look at the quality of competition in the division, it's really strong. But do you think that there's any chance, like, given the additions that Ottawa has made this year, that they have the potential to move up in the standings?
I think it's definitely possible. I think a lot of things have to go right for them to move up. My assumption is that they finished anywhere between 5th and 7th in the division. I think 7th is the most likely, to be frank. And I don't really expect them to crack into that top 4 and to make the playoffs.
It pains me to say it, but I have to agree. I do have a feeling that, like, something unexpected could happen, but it's very hard to make a valid argument and say, yeah, I think the Sens are going to finish 4th. It's very hard to do that.
There's just too many things that have to go right for me to really put my faith into that.
So that we don't have to end this on such a depressing note. If there was, what would it take for you to consider this year a successful season for the Senators?
Well, I think we've talked about it a lot already, but it really just revolves around seeing some steps forward from the younger guys. I think it'd be really nice to see a bounce back year from Colin White. Obviously, a good rookie year for Stützle, and some of the rookies cementing a place in the lineup. I'd love to see Logan Brown finally get a spot. Drake Batherson really should be in the lineup this year, and Norris has gotten a really good look in camp. So seeing them get in there would make for a good year for me, and definitely hoping that Matt Murray kind of regains that form from a couple of years ago, given the big extension that the Sens signed him to in the offseason.
Absolutely exciting times to be a Sens fan. We've already had to wait 10 months, but we only have to wait 3 more days, as Friday night Ottawa versus Toronto in the season opener. Thank you very much, Nathan, for taking the time to come on the show. I appreciate it, and go Sens go.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Go Sens go.
Thanks again to Nathan for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure talking to you about hockey and the Ottawa Senators and previewing the season for the team. If you're watching this episode on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment. And tune in tomorrow as I continue the season preview for Canadian teams, as I'll be interviewing Jeff Gould about the upcoming season for the Vancouver Canucks. Peugeot. First round pick, Mason, Silverberg for Ryan, McCulloch, Kovalev, California road trips, Lalim, Hasek, Gerber, carousel of goalies. Buddy Robinson, Ben Harper, Bobby Ryan, Spartacat, Boro, Hoffman, LeBreton is a no-go. Elliott, Anderson, Alex Aldis back again. Dorian says, we're a team, someday we will win the cup. We didn't start the rebuild. It was always brewing since 2009. We didn't start the rebuild. No, we didn't start it, but this time we've got it.